Mr. Yang, thank you for being here. It's fantastic to see you.
It's great to be here, and we're in studio.
Yes, yes, yes. Good to see you in person, and of course, we always see you on the campaign trail. I do have a few questions about one of the proposals you're most well known for, universal basic income. So let's dive in. I have a few questions, and I'd love to break it down for our viewers. So first, who gets a check?
Here in New York City, we're going to target $1 billion in cash relief to people who are struggling in extreme poverty. So people who are often just on the edge of losing their homes, maybe can't even put food on the table. And Ayanna, the tough part's actually going to be connecting and identifying some of these people, because many of them may not even have bank accounts or an address. So we're going to have a lot of work to do. But the fact is, if we invest in the neediest New Yorkers, it's actually going to be a huge benefit on a human level, but it also may save us money, because as people hit our sheltering system and other systems, it's very, very costly.
How would you get that check to the New Yorkers in need?
My organization last year, Humanity Forward, distributed $1 million to 1,000 struggling families in the Bronx. And the way we did that was through an organization that was working with the families in the Bronx to help them get on their feet. So we're going to be partnering with organizations that have connections to people who are struggling in just about every community and neighborhood in the city. How
much money would those checks be? And how often do they get the check?
Well, it would depend upon the individual and their circumstances, but it'd be roughly $200 a month for the average family.
Okay. What kind of a realistic difference do you think that $200 a month would make in someone's life? You said on the campaign trail a check would go to about 500,000 people, but we did some research, and if you'll take a look at that number, 500,000 people, that's only about a third of the New Yorkers who are living in poverty. So, Mr. Yang, what would you do for those other two-thirds who are still living in poverty?
There's a lot of work to be done. I want to make New York City the anti-poverty city. So this $1 billion in cash relief is just for starters. I'm hoping to get even more in the way of resources, but there are other things we can do to help New Yorkers who are at the poverty line. I want to get the check cashing fees and the money lending fees and even the pawn shop lenders out. People are spending money they don't have on financial services that can be delivered to them nearly cost-free. It's way too expensive to be poor in the city. We need to connect households with high-speed internet that want it. At this point, being data poor is another form of poverty. So there are a lot of things we can do to alleviate poverty and its effects in New York.
Henry has a few questions for you next.
Hi, Mr. Yang. It's great to see you. It's great to be in person. I feel exactly the same way. I want to follow up on something you said on the Pix 11 Morning News last week. You proposed a sort of warning system for mentally unwell people. Quote, what we need to do is actually document that with a warning. How exactly would that work?
Well, I shared a story from the trail where I encountered a mentally ill gentleman who shoved a photographer and then weeks later beat an elderly Asian man on the subway. So if you're a police officer and you encounter someone, right now we don't get much information. We know whether you arrested them or not, but we don't know if they did something that made you concerned, but you didn't want to place them under arrest during that occasion. So if you just document, look, I warned this person for being disruptive, for being aggressive in this environment, and then another officer encounters that person 3 days later and they're being similarly aggressive, then you can take action before the person does something criminal, destructive, even violent.
To another policing issue I know you've spoken very personally on. According to the NYPD, there were 28 hate crime incidents in all of 2020, and in just the first few months of this year, there's been 42. But to specifically address the problem, you've suggested beefing up the NYPD Asian Hate Crime Task Force. What I want to ask is more policing truly the answer, especially in immigrant communities, communities of color where there will be distrust issues with the police?
We have to build those connections of trust, and I can agree with you completely that a lot of these incidents are going unreported. I speak to Asian American families who've been victims of assaults, and they haven't said a word. So in the process of building those connections, and I do think that funding the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Task Force would be a piece of that, but we also have to try and address the reality on the ground. And if you look at the hate crimes that are being perpetrated against New Yorkers, about half of them are being committed by mentally ill people on the street. And this happened in my neighborhood where a mentally ill man just punched a woman in the face. So if we reduce street homelessness by 50% or more, which I've committed to do, we'll actually also be reducing the number of hate crimes because there'll be fewer mentally ill people on our streets.
Ayanna?
Thank you, Henry. Let's talk about jobs. How many would you like to create in your first term as mayor?
I want to get all of the missing jobs back. And right now we're missing about 550,000 jobs.
Okay.
So how are we going to get them back? About half of those jobs are in retail, hospitality, hotels, tour bus operators. Us being in studio today is actually the path back to recovery, where if we get people, commuters, tourists back in New York City, we can restore hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, to get that energy, those people back into the city, we have to address public safety first and foremost. No one wants to visit a city if they feel like it's not safe. And then we have to invest in the storefronts and the small businesses, particularly in neighborhoods in the outer boroughs that have been hardest hit during this time. I've proposed a People's Bank that will funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into these small business owners' hands so they have a chance to reopen. And then when the people come back, they'll actually have storefronts to visit.
Thank you for that. You've said on the campaign trail with your startup, Venture for America, that you created thousands of jobs. But the true goal was actually to create 100,000 jobs. So how do you set and meet a realistic jobs goal for New York City?
Well, New York City is in a position where we know that the jobs are potentially there because they were here in 2019. And so we just have to get the level of economic activity and confidence back to that level. It starts with public safety. It continues with cleanliness and sanitation. I cannot tell you how many New Yorkers are disgusted by the levels of trash that are piling up on our streets, which, by the way, is bad for business. It's bad for tourism. And so if we can get the confidence back, then the jobs will be here. And that's something that we've already seen in certain parts of our economy.
Henry?
Let's shift to education for a moment. You told the New York Post you want to de-emphasize testing into the city's elite high schools. So what should that admissions process look like?
It's common sense, Henry. If you ask a parent, and I'm a public school parent, our kids are not a number. No, like there's not one data point that's going to say where our child should go to school. So common sense would say we should include grades, teacher recommendations, interviews, essays. And if we do these things, then we can have schools that better reflect the diversity of our city. We can meet multiple goals at once. And the other thing I'd say is we should be expanding the number of slots. Because if you have a school system of 1 million kids and there's demand for these selective high schools, why not create more? Particularly when a lot of kids are commuting an hour or more just to get to school each way.
But so, to be clear, would testing be part of that mix that you're talking about, or would all testing go away? I mean, we test 4-year-olds in this city right now, for example.
And I disagree with the way that we're apportioning some of these programs to certain schools. I want to let leaders lead. And who's the leader of a school? The principal. If the principal thinks that their students would benefit from an enrichment program, that child should not have to test to go to another building or school to get that program. The same is true for special needs programs. I have an autistic son who's had an IEP since day one. And so if that's what our kids need, then the school should be able to deliver that within the building. So these are the things that we can do that are going to improve the educational outcomes for kids all throughout the city.
Ayanna's got a couple of questions about coronavirus recovery.
Absolutely. Do you support a New York City coronavirus vaccine passport? And if so, where should New Yorkers have to show a passport to get into?
I know, I went to the Nets game the other day, and you had to show that you've been vaccinated. There was like a vaccination line. And I thought it was great. I think it'd be necessary for people to be able to convene in theaters, at sporting events that are indoors. So I do endorse a passport, and I think it should be up to the venue operator whether or not to utilize it. But this should be a spur for New Yorkers to get vaccinated. And if you're watching this and you're not vaccinated, just get vaccinated. It's great, it's safe, it's free. They might even throw in a free Metro card if you do it in the subway.
So what about New York City school children? Would you require that they show up in September with a COVID-19 vaccine?
Our kids should be back in school 5 days a week, and I say this as a public school parent. It's better for their learning. You learn 50% better in person. Maybe this interview is 50% better because it's in person.
We like to think so.
Yeah. But school's not just book learning. It's socialization. My kids need social skills, extracurriculars, athletics. So kids being back in school is the right move for them. And if a vaccine is approved for school children, the fact is we have vaccines that are already required for a lot of our kids to attend schools. So we just have to do what's necessary to make sure our kids are learning in schools in September.
So yes, you would require if students were eligible?
If it's approved and they're eligible, yes, I would.
And what about teachers?
Well, the goal should be that, in my view, most teachers are going to be vaccinated anyway, so I don't think that there's any need to impose a requirement.
Thank you. Henry?
One last fun question for you. Broadway's coming back in September. What's your first show?
Wow, what are the new ones?
You're asking the wrong person here, unfortunately. I'm going to see an old one, Chicago, but what are you seeing?
Well, if you were say, like, what are my favorites, one of them that just popped into mind was Wicked. I really enjoyed Wicked a lot.
Is Evelyn holding tickets? Do you know?
Well, I should ask her. She really should. And you know, when Broadway opens, Evelyn and I will be there on night one.
Mr. Yang, I appreciate you taking the time, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks,
Thank
Diana.
you.
Only one person said an actual show. That was Lion King, just to be clear. We did ask Andrew Yang whether he would vote for Governor Andrew Cuomo if Cuomo runs again next year, like we did for every candidate. He told us that he will vote for whoever is the Democratic nominee.